our planning department does administer some level of landscape or tree preservation elements. So I only included this slide for you to see the difference in scope. So it's not only going to be pertaining to a residential property, but this landscape and tree preservation ordinance will need to think about commercial properties. This will also need to think about right-of-ways. So the center image there is our current Q Island Parkway. The left picture to the left is commercial property or resort property, and the far right is a residential home at the back, at the rear of their property. And so I want you all to be aware that when we go into this particular ordinance evaluation or development, that you're not only focusing on the property owner's perspective, but think about the drive, think about how you approach a certain site. All of those things would need to be considered. I will not go holistically through this particular slide because I've been chatting with Jim, Jordan, our wildlife biologists, and our sort of what I would call environmentalists on staff. But we all know that trees provide a wealth of benefit. And so these are just a sort of a list here of those benefits. And when we design or develop rather this comprehensive landscape and tree preservation ordinance, these are some of the things outside of aesthetics that I want you to be aware of, that these provide a benefit to the community. So whether it's around energy, of building efficiency with shading, providing sound barriers to different things in buffering. Of course, we know about habitat. On last Friday, the marsh management work group met, and we know how trees can filter water and plants can filter water before it enters the stormwater general system. And so these are some of those benefits that I want you all to be aware of in designing this. But I'll ask, I think, Jim to make, hopefully it'll be able to happen next month, but provide you all with a little bit more background knowledge of some of the benefits in landscaping and tools there. So this was not a part of your materials. I added this slide just on actually late yesterday. But what I wanted to show you again in your approach to thinking about this, the elements of site design have a play a big part around landscaping. And so rather you look at let me just give an example. So if a property owner comes to develop their property, we can in general say, okay, that's a nice tree that we want to make sure that stays on that site because it's a 20-inch oak and has a really nice aesthetic look, and we want to preserve that tree. That's one thing I think everyone will say, okay, that's pretty reasonable. But what are other things that you might not have considered as part of that site design that are elements in as far as landscaping and trees? So this particular slide kind of addresses some of that. And this will help you think about, from a staff perspective, when we get calls from property owners about their neighbors or new development, or we get calls about specific damage to an existing lot or after a storm event. So street trees, the systematic planting of new trees adjacent to right-of-way. So can we as a town begin to codify anytime a street is now improved? You know that the town only is responsible for 2 of those, which is the Parkway and Beachwalker. But can we codify anything that sets a standard of future landscaping? Anytime any improvement is made, these are the standards that need to be applied. Site landscaping, the installation of new vegetation. So as a new project is brought online, you can see that it might need to think about, now there's a view shed that we need to protect. So let's put a tree here to help protect that view shed from an adjacent property owner. It could be something that you want to maintain a view. So this has a natural view to the marsh that you want to always protect. And so the siting of that specific tree is important, so that needs to be built into this landscape ordinance. Parking, we already administered, I didn't share that in that list of things, but how many trees in the parking lot that helps not the whole acre look like just a field of asphalt? And so those are the things I want you to think about. Screening, of course, that's physical separation from land uses. So maybe there's a mechanical equipment or something of that nature that needs to be screened more detailed. So these are, I think, elements that I want you all to be aware of when we begin this process. Again, this is more an exhaustive list of some of the things that I just mentioned. But like I said, landscaping is not just trees. It's determining also materiality. So think about a homeowner and their side yard path to get to the backyard. Is that stone? Is that gravel? These are the types of things that we can consider as a town in our landscaping ordinance. Site lighting. Landscaping can also include types of lighting. So like I said, this is, it's gonna be a big undertaking for you to understand. It's not just tree planting and let's put some trees here, it makes it look nice, but we're setting standards for how a lot of, how you envision the island to look, essentially. So, in moving forward, I thought that this slide would be helpful for, and I've mentioned some of this already, right? The first thing that says designing with nature. As Kiowas have been developed, like I said, the historical development pattern has relied on designing with nature as a concept, as well as designing with nature, the actual physical guidelines administered by the Architecture Review Board. And so I included that as, well, we have a framework that's been successful and shown to be successful, so we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel so much.
Exactly.
The town has pushed native plants. Grow Native is a program, probably that, I don't know, Petra, you don't recall when we started Grow Native officially, but nonetheless, it's an initiative to push that we utilize plants that can withstand, be more resilient to our climate and to our region here. And so not everyone has been able to buy into that yet, because sometimes it doesn't give the aesthetic look that some folks may desire. But from a long-term standpoint, it's much more benefit to the environment, much more benefit to the wildlife that we see in this area. And so I want to be able to push that as part of this landscaping initiative here. Kiowa Next. How might changes of this specific ordinance be infused with our larger comprehensive plan? So as we go through this process, there might be things that have come up, and maybe we need to insert that into our comprehensive plan, or vice versa. We might hear things from the development of comprehensive plan that says, okay, maybe we should consider it as part of this tree preservation ordinance. Think about contrasting neighborhoods. So there are areas on Kiowa where some area has been developed for 30 plus years, and there's a new area being developed. How do we capture elements of landscaping that make those sort of be harmonious? Or maybe they need to be distinguished differently. So I just want you to think about that aspect of when we go into this exercise here. And then capacity building, right? Might not be a responsibility specifically for the Planning Commission, but more so for council. But as this is developed, we know the administration of landscaping and tree preservation will require a little bit more resources, whether that's learning new terminology for enforcement, or whether that's investing in additional resources, landscape architects. The bigger conversation really around accountability measures. So when today requiring surveys, requiring registered architects to provide details of that sort, that requires some internal conversations from the town to evaluate. Do we need additional staff? Those types of conversations to make sure that if we are creating a more comprehensive landscape and tree preservation ordinance, what burdens does that put on a town now? Because we relied on the Architecture Review Board to do that for Kiowa's sort of existence here. And then I mentioned already guidelines and standards for rights-of-way. Like I said, we're essentially won't have too many more new right-of-way being developed, but as the town may grow, we want to have a standard in place that if it does, we can point and say, this is the cross-section that we expect for a right-of-way to look like. And so what I mean by cross-section is like, how is that landscape? How is the bike path landscape? How is the sidewalk landscape? What's the distance and tree heights requirements? All of those things can be considered in this approach. So I'm wrapping up here, and I just want you to see sort of some next steps. So essentially, just like any of our initiatives here, we'll establish a work group and begin to look at other examples, research other communities' successes, evaluate some of our own successes here on Kiowa. I think it'd be important for us to talk to design professionals because they are the expertise in knowing the applicability of Kiowa and how they've been able to make Kiowa look and design over years. And then being able to, like I said, fuse that into our Kiowa Next plan so that this creates some continuity. And then ultimately, of course, that will lead to a recommendation provided by this group up to council, where council would make that final decision. But these are our sort of next steps. And I've listed here as a tentative date of the 20th. However, the target date to have a recommendation back to town council in June, which means we would have our recommendation meeting in May for Planning Commission. Like I said, this is a big task, but that's a pretty aggressive timeline. Because the nuances of all of the different elements, that may be fused a little bit, but don't be so much pressured by the timeline, in my opinion, more so by the lift of what we see is appropriate for Kiowa. That's it for me, Mr. Chair. If that was sort of an introduction of kind of where we're going with this.
Okay, thanks, John. And we have fellow commissioners that are assigned to various work groups on action items and issues that are critical because get a better understanding of those issues, and they'll come back before us, and when they do, we'll have a much better understanding. So for the tree and the landscape preservation, I want to thank Larry Iwan, Joanne Hennessy, and Dr. Kern, who are working on this task force. We appreciate all your efforts. John, if you would continue, we'll move on to correspondence staff comments.
Can we build before we let John go? Can you tell me, and you mentioned it a few times, is this the first shot across the bow, or are we trying to conflict with or concur with the design with nature?
I don't know if that's a trick question.
Yeah.
But,
I would assume we're going to use the design with nature a lot as
absolutely.
a template for what we're doing.
Are we going to eliminate the requirement in the existing ordinance to rely on a design with nature or require a sign off?
I don't think it's a very strong requirement.
so
I mean, it's not codified.
we don't need to have that debate today, but that is a big question of part of how do we essentially go from one entity doing something that we want to keep that element of what that entity was doing for our own selves. And so
Initially, this would...
the short answer is yes, I think we will be using the designing with nature as a tool to develop our own standard.
This would only apply to town-owned properties in the beginning?
So this would be administered to all properties. So that this is looking whole comprehensive. This would not apply to one property, or this is looking at every property on the island.
So you're going to eliminate the requirement for compliance with design with nature?
Say eliminate
No, I don't
compliance.
think
There is no requirement.
It's one of the things
It's
that
a
they got to get a sign off.
suggestion.
They got to get a sign off now.
Yeah, but you're saying, so, because my question is the ARB.
So like I said, I
Is this in
don't.
conflict with?
That's what I said. I don't want this commission to be. This is tied to, as I mentioned, a larger picture, and so I don't want this committee to be tied down on the moving parts of where the ARB is today versus where it'll be tomorrow.
Right.
But this will focus on the standards itself.
Let me ask it a different way. Potential homeowner or architect walks into Bruce's office and doesn't have an ARB sign-off on a design or landscaping function. Does he push him back to ARB, or does he use the new ordinance to agree on the property and then have the property owner face some sort of sanction on the part of the ARB?
So that's a question of a larger picture of the actual governance structure of today. And I don't want to go into the governance structure of what will happen tomorrow as it pertains to the Architectural Review Board and covenants and all of those things.
But how are you going to design an ordinance to put in place and have in writing something that either exists or doesn't exist now, or conflicts with or doesn't conflict with what's required?
It's just like any other ordinance that we would develop. Whatever ordinance that we would develop would apply if it applies to the town property. So any properties that are within the jurisdiction of the town would be applicable. It would marry the same way.
John, let me ask Andy this, is that I see it maybe correct me if I'm wrong, is that we have zoning regulations that the town requires. Now, a neighborhood, ARB, could have more restrictive ones, but they have to meet at least the minimum of what we establish in our codes, right?
Correct.
And this would be very similar. We could, ideally, they could be the same.
Ideally, they could be the same. Ideally, each neighborhood could have as they do today, their own covenants that are much more restrictive, than our town.
That's right. So this is no different than that.
So I go back to the question, are you going to eliminate the requirement in the existing building ordinances to have a sign-off by the ARB?
So today, that will probably be adjusted to where it is recommended that an architect or design team reach out to the Architectural Review Board, but not a requirement.
But are we having the tail wag the dog here then? By doing this ordinance, are we automatically eliminating the ARB? Because a recommendation, they can say, okay, fine, nice recommendation, we're not going to do it.
That's to say, I do not want you guys to get caught up in what the ARB represents today. That's not what this ordinance is. We are looking at our own standard of what would apply to the town. So if a property owner is in the town, they would need to meet setback standards that are outlined, height standards that are outlined in our zoning code, and this would create now landscape standards that are in our zoning code. So
The whole island.
the whole island.
Not the town,
No, the whole island.
The whole island.
No different than our zoning codes.
So
No different.
it's no different.
It
So
is.
this would now be landscape standards part of the zoning code. So our zoning code, just like a property owner says, okay, I'm going to build a new house, they have to meet a certain height standard, they have to meet a certain setback standard. Now they will have to meet a certain landscape and tree preservation standard.
all right, and if
But
it's
they
in
don't have to
conflict
go
with
to
the
the-
ARB, what happens?
I'm sorry?
If it's in conflict with the ARB, what happens?
So we will create this ordinance absent of the ARB.
So they don't have to go to the ARB anymore?
If you want
ahead,
to,
Mike.
I'm going to defer that because it's a bigger, I don't want you guys to get, yes, please.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, clarify for us.
It's a what if.
So I think we all know that there's a lot of discussion about the ARB. Some has to do with the fact how the ARB is currently conducting the business. They think they have, and they have. But there's also, of course, a lot of discussion what happens when the development agreement expires, et cetera. For the tree ordinance, like John said, for any other ordinance that we have, it is our responsibility to define what we think is right for the town, for our community, for our long-term vision, right? And if this is, as Andy said, in conflict with ARB rules, then the ARB has to adjust. In whatever, setup the ARB is or will be in the future, right? But if we believe that for our town, for our vision of this town, this entire island, we want to impose certain requirements as John outlined in such detail, from right-of-ways to private properties to commercial properties, et cetera, if we feel that this is matches up with our comprehensive plan, that's what this ordinance should be, and then others have to comply with it. So, Andy, to your point, what if there is a conflict? Well, the conflict needs to be resolved by the ARB because we are setting the minimum standards. If the ARB decides, or maybe has today's practices that goes beyond the ordinance, that's up to them, or whoever is going to govern this topic in the future, we don't know, right?
But don't we have our own conflict?
The minimum requirement is what we are setting.
Don't we have our own conflict in the ordinance? By the building department requiring a sign off by the ARB?
There are conflicts of such kind that you're referring to, and that's what we are looking at the moment. Okay. So we had that discussion, for example, in the recent town council retreat about particular this topic, and we have one work group, which I believe is John Moffitt and Brad Belt, that are looking into this explicitly, okay? Because we need to make sure that all the ordinances are actually in compliance, right? And at the moment, there are people that are saying that a requirement by the town to have ARB approval is not rightful, right? So, but this is going to be resolved, but this is not your issue. That's why John said, look at this ordinance as a way also for us to implement your vision from the comprehensive plan, right? That's the objective as it relates to tree and landscaping. Right? And also don't forget that we have another disconnect here, that in the current comprehensive plan, we do talk about the designing with nature. It is even on the last pages of our action plan for the current comprehensive plan, saying that we want to follow these guidelines, etc., but we've never really rolled them over in an ordinance to enforce. This, to me, from my point of view, this ordinance that we are just discussing is part of the element of actually making the comprehensive plan actionable and enforceable.
Thank you, Michael. I think it's
All right, let me add one other point. Understanding that Mike is going to solve that problem, hopefully. There's one other thing that I'd add to your list of things you're going to cover in the ordinance, and that's safety. Right now, the biggest cause or cost of damage to property in storms, significant storms, flooding, whatever, is trees and water. And if you write an ordinance that requires a certain thing that ignores the fact that, and the facts, the fact is that you can't put them too close to a house, you can't make them too big, you can't limit the pruning of trees, you can't limit the existence of trees or require a certain number of trees. You got to be careful of the safety issues. And that would be one thing I think the task force has got to consider.
I think that's where we're getting consultants and landscape guys to work with us on the program. I don't know what those are, but I'm expecting somebody's going to tell me.
I'm just pointing out that's one of the things you got to consider.
Thank you.
Those things are in the design with nature
Yeah,
guidelines.
they are.
I mean, so they specifically say you can't prune, or, or you can if you get ARB approval.
Which is sort of against the safety issue.
Yeah.
Right, so, but I mean, they have it already, and it doesn't seem like it's been a problem.
We
you
can
don't
eliminate
have
the tree
anything
problems
about
by
how close
cutting
you
all the
build.
trees.
So I want to reiterate that when we look at this particular ordinance, the last few amendments that we've made to several ordinance will not take as heavy lift as this will, because this is essentially starting from square zero. And
Hold on, John, we're starting from, for the design with nature.
Yeah.
I understand
We're
that,
definitely gonna use that.
but what I'm saying is that I want you guys to not just say, this is our designing with nature and we're moving forward with that. I want you guys to really dive into all aspects of where you see
Well,
Kiowa.
you've included six
Yeah.
additional topics that they don't have, you know, with.
So,
And I think we should call it a landscape ordinance, not a tree protection ordinance, because as you say, it's much more than trees.
landscape and tree preservation. So we can work on the title, yeah.
It's a major shot across the bow, and I look forward to the results.
Okay, we're gonna move on now. John, if you will, stay there and give us an update on the, council staff comments.
Yes, I want to briefly mention, like I said, on March 3rd, which was last Friday, we did meet as a work group for the marsh management plan. Both Madeline and Andy were part of that. Our next meeting be scheduled next month, but just a few takeaways from that meeting. Essentially, 3 priorities will be set by this work group to be able to be tackled, to sort of have a goal by the end of the year to get those 3 things done, which is 1, developing a comprehensive community engagement or awareness education sort of campaign to really invigorate the community to know what this marsh management plan means, how can they do whatever they can do individually to support marsh management and marsh efforts, educating them about the benefits of the salt marsh, et cetera. So that's a comprehensive approach. The second will be more detailed, I think, from an ordinance standpoint, or just a review of how do we incentivize folks to look at permeable versus impermeable surfaces. And so that is another thing that eventually will make its way back to this group here for review. And then the third being looking at, which some efforts are already in works, of the Kiowa Island Bridge, the causeway there, that public access point. And so those 3 things, we'll start with that as sort of our phase 1 and try to tackle those things hopefully by the end of this year, or at least from my goal setting, within 1 year from the adoption date. So that gives us an extra 2 months going into February.
That permeable versus impermeable could be part of the tree preservation.
Precisely.
That would obviously mandate that the community has to apply, you know, comply with the new ordinance.
You've recognized something I said. I don't want folks to just see tree preservation as just trees. This is really looking at how we treat permeable surfaces, all of the like. So yes.
But I mean, again, that's great, because if we come out with that in the ordinance, then everyone has to comply.
Yeah. That's one. Sorry, lost track there. The second, I won't go too much in all of the presentations that were made. I'm sure Michael will cover that in his update at yesterday's town council meeting. Council did approve the first reading for the changes in a public notification requirements. And what else am I missing? That's all I have.
What is this, John?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So that document in front of you, Kiowa Island Conservancy's Nature-Based Solutions, that is a document of part of this communication initiative for us to educate the community. Once we go into some of these marsh management recommendations, how we treat areas, for example, along critical lines, that booklet has a lot of solutions in there. So it's natural-based solutions. So not everything will require a bulkhead. Some might require, so it's just great reading material as we go through some of these things in the next few months. I thought was helpful that the Conservancy has developed. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thanks, John.
Fine.
As John did mention the marsh management work group, and we do thank Andy and Madeline for serving on that group. Appreciate it. Michael, would you update us on any town council issues?
Maybe first, if I may, some comments to your last discussion about the tree ordinance. First, the name is a name at the moment, you know. So if the work group feels that there's a better name, a more comprehensive name, don't feel limited only because we are using a certain name. In the town council, it was always called just the tree ordinance. So John brought another touch to it, rightfully so, but I think the name is also something that can be discussed and should be discussed. Second topic from my side, I think it would also be helpful for the work group to look at benchmarks. So what are other towns doing here in South Carolina or along the coastline, you know, other island or beach or resort communities, etc. I'm sure that there is something we can learn from it and then adapt. So I'm not suggesting just take it over and be done with it, but look at other things so that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And then a third topic that shines through a little bit of what John said, but I want to really highlight this, is the topic of clear cutting. Okay, I have seen at least in recent years that that construction companies are basically, you know, erasing everything on a property up to the setback line, no matter what. If you drive along Governor's Drive, I think that's the most prominent place where I see it. All of these more recent, you know, the last 12, 18 months maybe, properties that came up, especially closer to the preserve entrance, is a good example, right? And I think that's also something you want to look at it. I understand the reasons why they want to do it, but I think it ends up with properties that don't look the way we might want them to look, okay? Just some comments. So back to the town council meeting, I want to highlight a few things and also two in our own interest, hopefully because somebody's also listening. Here, first of all, there was a very valuable comment from a community member yesterday about the housing topic that should be included in the comprehensive plan. You talked about this in the workshop. I just wanted to mention that because I think that's a very valid point that we have to look at, or that you have to look at when developing the comprehensive plan. We also, yesterday in the meeting, unfortunately towards the very end, it was a long meeting, but I hope that a lot of people still have been listening. We opened up the discussion with the community about two very important projects for this entire community. One, as it relates to what is currently called Endel West, so the commercial expansion of Freshfields Village to the south by Riverstone, a Goodwin family company. And here we have really worked hard, various community groups actually have worked really hard with the developer to find a layout, a design, something we call Plan B for that property that I think will fulfill the far, far majority of all the concerns, or eliminate, I should say, a large amount of all the concerns that have been raised by the community. I assume that in this context, we might see a development that then ends up on your plate because it makes, of course, a lot of sense both for the developer but also for the community to again discuss annexation and a planned development for this property. The advantage for the developer is time, because we can at least be much faster than the Charleston County, but most importantly because it makes sense, right? I mean, it can't be that we have a current Freshfields with a certain set of ordinances and then you cross over into the southern part and all of a sudden there are different ordinances. So I think there's a lot of benefit of these discussions. Nothing is decided yet. Especially also Riverstone has to make a final decision in that respect. I just wanted to let you know that there might be something coming your way as it relates to Endel West. In a similar context, also something that might come your way is the current discussion we are having with the Kiowa Island partners about this entire area of intersection between Beachwalker Drive and Kiowa Island Parkway right in front of the first gate. okay? It's an area where we have significant traffic issues, we have significant safety issues, both for vehicles but also for pedestrians and bikes, etc. And we are relatively confined in this area as it is today. This is why we had several attempts of solving issues as it relates to that intersection, which kind of ended up nowhere because there was no perfect solution. There were some discussions about, eliminating some of the reasons why there is backup at the first gate, for example, the pass issuing for guests and visitors, but also that kind of never really took us anywhere. The approach we are now taking is really holistically. We are looking at all of this together. The pass issuing, the traffic situation, the safety situation, the property that is known as the Kiowa Island Real Estate Building is part of the equation, and also the Upper Beachwalker parcels are part of the equation for various reasons, and we elaborated on this in the town council meeting yesterday. And there might be certain then plans and applications that are also coming your way. So I would, in both cases, recommend to the Planning Commission members to keep up to date on what's going on. We in the Town Council will be very transparent and very communicative about these topics because we need the further input from the community about how we want to handle this. I think as it relates to Endel, we are probably more at the end of this process. As it relates to the intersection, more at the beginning. A good way of keeping up to date maybe is watching the news podcast that we are launching tomorrow. So you will see an email coming from the town with a news podcast with the mayor and me talking about these both topics. For the first time, it's a video, it's not just an audio podcast, so that's also hopefully nice and appreciated by the community. So that will be another element for you, but also for the entire community to keep updated on these two topics. And I really also want to promote both to you and also the audience and those people on their computers that for the first time we will launch now our so-called community drop-in meetings. This is one of the concepts we developed after the retreat to increase the interactive communication between the town council and the community. This meeting will be here in the town center, most likely here in this room. We haven't figured that out because there's a conflict. Otherwise, it will be in the executive conference room next door. But this is a meeting where always two council members of us will be in the room. There's no agenda, there's no presentation, there's no formal beginning or end to it. Yes, there is a time, of course, between 9 and 11, but it's not a regular, town council meeting. It is a very informal meeting where people can drop in and ask us any questions they have on their minds, share with us their concerns, their criticism, their areas for improvement. So it's a really supposed to be a direct communication between town council members and the community. That is this Friday, March 10th, from 9 to 11, here in the town center. We will actually alternate the location. We are discussing with Kika, for example, also to use the Sandcastle for this. Because this building here can sometimes be a little intimidating for people, so we want to have it in a more casual environment. Maybe we can even convince Stephanie to have some bagels for us in these meetings. So that's going to happen for the first time on Friday. I would love to see you all, and hopefully a lot of community members will bombard us with questions and comments, maybe also a few positive of those, but if they are negative, then we can only learn from it.
You said 10 a.m.?
From 9 to 11. Friday, this week, Friday is the first meeting, and these will be recurring meetings, just with different people. So this time we start with John Moffitt and me. Next time will be two other council members, so we will rotate, because we will do this every Friday after each town council meeting. So that's it.
Like at the Nest or someplace where it's easier to people to get to.
We also
because a
thought
lot of
about
people
that.
aren't
We have
gonna
to talk to
drive
the
out
resort, if that's, but we really want, the intention really is to break down barriers. And that's why I think the Sandcastle is a good place, and I'm sure we find other places as well. Maybe at some point we will even do it live, on the lawn in Freshfields or something like this. We'll figure this out on the way. But it is one of our many measures that we are planning and implementing now to really reach out more to the community, be available, be approachable, and give us the chance to listen. Okay?
Mike, two quick questions. On Andel, it wasn't clear yesterday, will they be, I know they're going through in Plan B to redesign, will they be able to submit the redesigned plans to the county commission in April?
No.
Which is,
I
they
don't
will
think
not,
that,
so
no,
that's going to
I
be
don't think
postponed.
no. I think this has to do a little bit with trust, and especially in us as a government, so to speak. So currently, actually in both cases, the developers are pursuing their original plans. So Riverstone is planning at the moment still to go in front of the Charleston County with Plan A, which I believe is not very advantageous for the community. They might postpone the date again, or they might make the decision that they will apply for a planned development with us in parallel to an annexation process. So we'll figure this out. We are in constant negotiations and discussions with them. Nothing has yet been finalized, but I'm actually really pleased with how Riverstone is handling this. The whole team, but also Chris Corrada. I think the Goodwin family has a lot of really good influence in this as well. So here I'm really optimistic that we will see a switch at some point, and then go through the process that we have, also including the newest annexation policy that we launched last year, I believe. So we will all do this by the books, but I think we can be faster than the county, and that's an advantage for them. But it is, as I said, a big advantage for the community, right? I mean,
Second question, and
please.
again, it relates not to Andel West, but to MUSC. They announced yesterday that they're considering an alternate site inside the town of Kiowa.
That is correct.
Will they be coming to the planning commission with revised plans?
Absolutely. If that materializes,
Right.
which we don't know, there's still a lot of talk in Seabrook to allow the annexation of Pohicket, which I think is the break point for all of this, to allow the second ingress for the current property. If the current planning activities of MUSC either shows that the property, which we don't know what it is, I might have some, ideas, but they never clearly said, yes, this is what it is. It might turn out to be a better location anyway, or it turns out to be the location of choice to make progress. Right?
Well, I'm principally concerned if it is in a town, they've got to go through the town's process to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In addition to all the medical sign-offs they got to get.
Absolutely. There's no question about that. Right. And we will support this because I think we all believe that the community really deserves that facility. More yesterday than today.
Sooner rather than later.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So, yes, absolutely. But it will all, of course, go through an absolute orderly process, no question. That's it?
I have a question.
Madeline?
Actually, a request for support. A couple of years ago, I think this predates both you and Joanne coming on the commission, I asked for the number of homes that were still to be built out on the island. And the answer at that time was kind of a soft 200. And at yesterday's meeting, Brad talked about that there are currently 5,000 certificates of occupancy, and 400 to 500 undeveloped lots. This moving target of the number of homes that are still to potentially be developed is frustrating. And I think as we tackle the comprehensive plan, it's really imperative that we get a hard number on what is it?
No, I think we should even go a step further also, as we discussed in the retreat. I think that needs to be a one-pager updated on a somehow regular basis. Mm-hmm. If this is done every 6 months or every year, I have no idea because I don't really know what the workload is. But I would think if we have a baseline, which I believe we have, right, then from there to do, you know, addition and subtraction every time something happens in the planning commission or in the building permit department, etc., that should not be an impossible task. For the comprehensive plan, I think without you cannot do anything. That's clear. But beyond that, I think we really owe this kind of update to the community on a regular basis. And my understanding from yesterday was, and from the retreat was, that that is a clear instruction from the town council to the town staff.
Well, we had the update from John September?
Last year,
August?
at some point, yeah.
There was
Summer.
some point when you did the rundown of available building lots, number of houses under construction, et cetera, et cetera. There's no reason that can't be updated quarterly and published. I mean, that's what you're at. 4,500 is ridiculous. I don't know where he's getting his number from.
I don't know either.
Maybe talking beds, I don't know what he's talking.
I don't know. But,
Yeah.
I mean, this discussion shows to me we owe to us and the community a clear status report. And if it needs to be every quarter, I mean, it's a lot of work still, but
It shouldn't
something
be.
like that on a regular basis, I think, should really be part of our communication to the community, yes.
Especially when you hear an outrageous comment from somebody in the know. It should be.
Yeah, I think we need a clear reference point that we all can rely on and think, okay, these are the numbers from here onwards. Joanne, you had a question also? Madeline, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I hope so. Okay.
Thank
Gentlemen,
you.
anything else, ladies?
Thanks, Mike. Good update. I'm going to pass on the public comments since we do not have any public members here and move straight to the commissioners' comments. And Dr. Curran, we'll start with you. Any comments?
You know, I guess seems that there's been a lot of progress, both with Andel West and now the discussions regarding the first gate. I guess presuming that there's probably been some discussion about the ARB, and I think that we need to proceed with the tree ordinance and other work groups with probably some assumption that there will be a change in the ARB.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Thanks. Joanne? No comment. Madeline?
No comments.
Well, I'll just say that yesterday while viewing the council meeting, it was very good to hear the town council and the mayor say that they were delighted with Plan B, and to have the representative from Riverstone really come across as if that partnership is coming together. So we really need to thank that our council members and our mayor for working hard on doing what's best for our residents. How about you, Andy?
I've had enough.
You had enough? Okay. Luke?
No comment.
One comment, John, you spent 30 minutes telling us how comprehensive and difficult and how meaty this thing's going to be, and you give us 5.5 weeks to do it.
Yeah.
Is that reasonable?
You weren't doing anything else in the next 5 weeks, were you, Larry?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Michael.
We are not reinventing the wheel.
Okay, that's what,
So first of all, there are quite a few tree ordinance type stuff out there. We have some good examples, the starting points.
okay.
So you have a head start.
All right, and a second question, who, I know that the three of us are on the, who is the managing this work group?
You're the what, vice chair?
Who?
Oh, congratulations.
I think 5.5 weeks is not enough time. Okay, all right, but we've got, so we're going to have a lot of material and,
We'll set it.
okay.
Yeah.
I don't golf anymore because I'm not good at it anymore, Michael.
Oh, that's not true.
So, and then the other thing I just want to make a comment is that I've been on the commission for a few years, and we've had several projects go through the Goodwin Group, and I think, Michael, you can trust them. They have a lot of currency with me, and I think if it's dependent on trust, I think you're with the right people. That's it.
Yeah, you have to see the trust thing the other
Oh, they got to trust you?
Okay,
That's
thank
it.
you.
Bill, I do have, given Larry's comment, I do have one.
You were
5.5
disappointing me, but go ahead.
5.5 weeks is more than enough time because
Oh.
Mike is gonna handle the biggest part of the problem. And you can write what you want in 5.5 weeks. Mike has got to solve how the conflict is resolved.
With that said, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn this wonderful meeting.
Enthusiastically move to adjourn.
A second? We're adjourned. Thank everyone.
Larry, why don't we talk calendars at some point and pick a time
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you again, Joe.
for us to get started on this?
These sessions,
Why don't we talk, Ann, and I missed that?
have it at your house, one of them's gonna be at your house?
Yes.